Rick, just bear with us for a sec.
No worries at all. I got as much time as you need.
You got a full basketball court in that office if you want to take practice foul shots.
I would love for you to all come over here. Today is mild. I should have not listened to the weatherman. I will be sexist on this one. Weathermen, because they always seem to be making a lot of mistakes on the weather. He's going to try. He's leaving the state. I'm sorry. He's leaving a meeting. He's going to try to get here. Yes.
We're waiting for two of our colleagues.
Is that Amy? Is that Amy Land that's there? Yeah, waving. Okay. I saw half her move over, half her face. So I thought that was Amy. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Marianne.
Good morning.
Morning, Sven.
Good morning. Do you want to sit up here so then he can see you? He's looking at the back of your head. I didn't know if you wanted to stand. You can sit next to us. No, thanks.
How are you feeling?
Amy's got a good position because if I say something stupid and she rolls her eyes, I won't know. So I would stay right where she is.
Neil texted back. Sorry, I have meet the lobbyist for later.
It was moved.
It's at 9:30.
It was at.
So we got home from all of our travels. I sort of cranked through a couple of meetings and ended up had pneumonia.
Here's Martha.
Here's Martha. Martha's coming. Hi, Keisha. I'm finally starting to feel like I'm coming out of like a hole in the ground or something. I was telling Marianne and Sven, I had a day over the weekend where I think I slept 20 or 21 hours. It was just,
Right.
my body basically just said,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Let's get that.
Oh yeah.
As long as you can still breathe.
Yeah, right. Martha, I'm gonna just call the meeting to order. We'll just wait for Martha. Today is Thursday, January 26th, 9:34 a.m. This is a meeting of the town council, talk about legislative issues. And we welcome Rick McAuliffe from the mainland for the May 4th group.
Good morning.
How'd Providence do last night? Did they win?
They did win. I went to bed, so they were winning at halftime, and I went to bed early. I've had a late week this week because of meetings in Boston and Hyannis. So I took advantage of reading about 15 pages of a book that I fell asleep on. So.
And you'll reread tonight.
I've done that before, saying, wait a minute, how did I get to this point? I don't remember that. So
That's right. She wasn't dead yet.
Rick, how was the response to the governor's budget proposal? About the same as usual, or
no, that's a great question. So the proposal, it was mixed. I think a number of people were surprised what he did with the projected surplus, which was in this current fiscal year $618 million, which will be the third year in a row where there's been a surplus. Obviously, most of it's a result of federal dollars coming to the state of Rhode Island, but I think people were mixed on a couple things. One, and most importantly, I think, is the result of the sales tax. As you know, Massachusetts is at 6%. I think Connecticut is at 6.25 or whatever. We're at 7%. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were surprised that it was only 0.15%, which would bring it down to 6.85%. So I think there were some people that thought he would be a little bit more bolder on that. But, you know, he's trying to balance other issues as well. So I think that was one of the things that surprised people. I think there was a recognition of the money he put in for more housing, some other areas, municipal or education aid in terms of doing that. So I think it was, I think like anything else, when you have surpluses of that amount, everybody has different ways to prioritize it. But, I think at the end of the day, for the governor and for the state, the three biggest issues are housing is number one. There's no question housing is number one in this issue in the state right now. Number two is education, specifically some of our urban areas, which we're seeing some closings. We're seeing test scores that aren't where they should be. And lastly would be workforce development. We're seeing not only private sector trying to find work. We're seeing the state as well. There's major openings throughout state government that have not been filled yet. So I think those are the three things that he's going to be looking at. He has a proposal to freeze the next gas tax for the state, which is in his budget. The assembly leaders don't seem as warm on that as they do maybe the sales tax reduction. So it'll be interesting what happens over the course of the next couple months as they start debating this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there are a lot of states that are going to get in a jam because they have used this federal largesse to actually try to fix structural issues.
Hmm.
And there ain't going to be no federal money. Certainly
No,
not.
that's a it's funny. A lot of the issues you're seeing in Rhode Island are not unique to Rhode Island. If you go around the country, you'll see governors proposing budgets that address housing, education, workforce issues, but also trying to how much money do we want to give back to taxpayers? And I think that's one of the issues that the governor here is doing. He did increase more money to the rainy day fund. Other states, our neighboring states like Massachusetts and Connecticut, have done this, are attempting to do the same thing. So it is a balance, and there's social services that are key to our economy that are under stress right now because of the workforce. So, for instance, childcare was a major problem in terms of finding people and finding good quality childcare, just because they don't have that. Same thing with our long-term care, specifically nursing homes. There's been staffing bill changes and stuff to increase the staffing ratio, but you can't get workers. So these are problems that are happening around the country, not just Rhode Island.
So hey, Neil. No problem, man. I don't know whether anybody has any sort of 60,000 feet questions for Rick about legislative agenda. One of the things that I would like to cover, though, because obviously we're going to talk about particular pieces of legislation, but I think I would like to perhaps start out a little bit more macro. I think you have 5 members of the council, a town manager and a finance director, who are very willing to be in Providence to the extent that it's necessary. I sort of feel like last session was a bit of a maiden voyage for us, and it was it was quite successful. But I think and I think Martha and I have talked about this a fair bit. A big part of this is making sure that we have a presence. And I'd like you to sort of walk through that idea a little bit, Rick. I'm sorry to hit you cold with that, but as I was.
No, and I appreciate that, Keith. And let me also, before I get started, just say hello to Margaret and Neil. Look forward to working with both of you. I've heard very good things from you, from Keith and Sven. Martha, it's great to see you as well. I hope everyone is doing fine. Let me talk a little bit more macro. I just kind of, as we were just waiting for the meeting to begin, we're talking a little about what's going on in the State House. But before we get into your presence, which I think is exceptionally important, I kind of want to lay everything out from a macro standpoint in terms of what hand we've been dealt. First, let me talk at the federal level, just so we have a better idea. So as you all know, Congressman Langevin, who's represented the island for many, many years, has retired. A very tight and close race for the congressional seat that Langevin was retiring for was won by Seth Magaziner, our former Rhode Island treasurer. He beat Alan Fung, as you all know, in a very close race. Seth is down now in Washington. Obviously, being a freshman member in the minority party is somewhat difficult in terms of getting stuff. It's always tough as a freshman, but it's equally or as tough now because you're in the minority party. But I have had a conversation with his new state director, and she's also a personal friend, Krista Thompson. Krista comes from my town of East Greenwich. Have a good long relationship with her and her husband, her late husband. I coached them only in Rhode Island. I coached her middle son in basketball for 6 years. She is the new district director. I had a nice conversation with her yesterday in anticipation of this meeting, and he acknowledged that the one town he did not attend during the campaign was Block Island, and that he plans on coming out sometime in the spring. I told him to book the whole day because the council, I mentioned specifically Mary Ann, has some ideas and thoughts in terms of some of the stuff that's been done on a day-to-day basis, and that can be helpful. So we have a new member of Congress. One of the things that's interesting with this is there was some success in getting federal dollars over the last 2 years as appropriations have come back into the fold in Rhode Island and throughout the country. They've appropriated. Senator Reid has been very, very successful. All you have to do is walk down the street and see money for the medical center, which is now going to be getting money. Not unfortunately, getting the money in the bill was great. Now they got to wait 3 or 4 months to do the paperwork and everything else. So we are looking at the federal level for a number of reasons. One, we have a divided Congress. Obviously, the president's party runs the Senate still, and they had actually gained a seat. But the House, as you all probably watched through television and read in the newspaper, is very divided. The Republicans have basically an 11-person hold on that, which means it only takes 5 or 6 votes to go the other way. So everything will be close. The big question is that the new speaker had to make a lot of compromises, we all know. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is what kind of compromises did he make with some of the more fiscal hardliners, not just will they extend the debt limit in Washington, but are they going to allow earmarks or congressional appropriations like they have the last 2 years? If you recall, this was a practice that was being done for 200 years. And then when the Republicans took over about 20 years ago, they actually got rid of them. And so we had a gap for about 18 years, maybe a little less, maybe 16 years. And they brought them back to much success. Federal money, which has always gone, has gone even more specific and more targeted because members of Congress told it where to go, where in the past that same money was appropriated, but it was appropriated to committee, to departments and agencies, and then municipalities had to fight for it, similar to what you have to do for grants and so forth. So this was very helpful. So I think the big question, $1 million question, I have to get an answer for all of you is what is going to happen this spring when it comes to appropriations. We're under the belief that they still will do it. But we also know that the appropriations are just a small piece in a larger budget, which every year gets fought and debated on. And even the budget that was just passed in December after the elections with the lame duck Congress. And that was some issue. So it'll be an election year in the next presidential election in 2 years. So it'll be interesting to see how people position themselves. Either, hey, I'm going to bring a lot of, what they'll call pork back to my district, or, hey, I'm going to be the stopgap for making sure our country doesn't go into bankruptcy because we're spending too much money. So we need to make sure that what we do is targeted to where the environment is. I will be in Washington down February 14th to 16th. I will have a better idea of what is available and what's going to happen. My conversations with Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse's office is that appropriations requests will still be taken, and they are still going to fight for them to get them in there. So from that micro, we'll get into the micro in a minute, but from a macro standpoint at the federal level, you're going to have opportunities. And my guess, and we've had conversations separately, and Mary Ann and I've had conversations. My guess is that by March 1st, we'll need to have our official requests in. Those requests will be a direct result of what you all want. It doesn't need to be 1 or 2 or 3. It can be multiple, but the key is making sure that those requests are not in the same bucket as others. And that's my job. My job is to make sure that your requests say, well, that's a good idea, but it may be in this bucket or that bucket. So for instance, and we'll talk about it when we get to the more micro, but for instance, the new harbor facility that we're looking at, the former Overlook property, that's in a bucket that is separate and apart from the public safety fire barn that we would like to renovate. So those two can happen simultaneously because they're in 2 separate buckets. And sometimes you get the request, sometimes you don't. I know the request that we had last year with the expanding that public safety building, the so-called fire barn, was something very close and something that I think they would like to do again next year. It just so happened that the request for the medical center was just that kind of year where they were able to get it in. So,
Hey, Rick, can I ask a question about that? Sorry to interrupt, but
No, have to.
I think the fire barn's a priority for all of us. And I'm curious about how it works at the federal level. Like, for example, does that necessarily have to be an earmark, or is that more programmatic? Sort of helping rural communities pay for fire barns.
No, it's a great question, Keith. A very good question. One of the things that when we talk about presence, and I think a day in Washington would always be helpful. They can certainly come here, but I think being able to meet with numerous people. One of the number one things I mentioned, if you roll back the tape from last year when we first got hired, was while appropriations are good, they're not always guaranteed. And the number one thing we need to do is make sure that we are categorized. I say we, the town of Block Island, is categorized in a way that your question can be answered much better, Keith, which is, hey, the fire barn would be great if we got an appropriation. But if we know that there's money at the Department of Agriculture for rural designated areas of the country. We know that getting money through the Medicare and Medicaid CMS department and get defined, which would help us with getting a graduate medical education doctor in, can happen if we have a different definition. And Mary Ann and I had a conversation last year with Senator Reid's office because they really wanted to push this fire barn. The problem was the way they handle public safety in the country. Most of it is done through applying for grants and so forth through departments and agencies. And we're kind of in a difficult situation, as all you know better than I do, which is, you're designated rural, but you're not real rural, or the other way around, I should say. And so we have that issue. So good question, Keith. We will continue having these conversations to get a better designation. So we'll have a much easier, better chance competing against rural communities, hard to get to communities, than going against, some of our neighbors in the state who are more suburban and more contiguous. So that's
Just a
something.
bit,
Okay.
just a bit of a follow-up on that.
Yeah.
Does it happen that, whatever, we get a letter co-signed by the two senators to whatever, the Department of Homeland Security, saying, you have money to do local public safety infrastructure, and we think Block Island, in other words, is that part of the strategy where we enlist the two senators especially to move an administrative agency to do something for us?
That is exactly, Keith, what needs to happen. And I think, one of the big requests that we would have to the congressional delegation is just that, the opportunity to plead our case to every department and agency in which we have interest. So, one of the thoughts of having a Washington day or 2-day trip would be the opportunity to not only meet with both senators and our congressperson, but also spend time at departments and agencies that can hear our issues. And then we can get back to the congressional delegation, say, hey, for instance, we met with the Housing and Urban Development, and there's a program for rural communities that are defined as those communities that aren't contiguous or less than 2,000 people. Or we go to Department of Agriculture and find out that there's opportunities there that we normally wouldn't get if we were designated a certain way. So absolutely, that's something that needs to be considered.
Great. Can we work on setting up a DC day?
Yeah, I'm writing this down right now. Yeah.
I think that would be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile to do that. I think it gives us an opportunity to get in front of people that'll tell us the way it is, and that's one of the things that's very helpful. We know that both of our senators are very active and influential people in Washington, and they're willing to help us out. But I think getting these meetings set up and seeing where agencies and departments categorize or identify Block Island helps, because if it's not identified or categorized
Right.
a certain way, we can then go back to our senators and say, we're not looking just for as much as we would like money for the fire barn. It may be easier to get a designation with in this type of way, which would help
Yep.
us compete for grants. Yeah.
Yep. That'd be great. And Sven and Laura own a tie-dyed VW van, so we'll all take the ferry over
Yep,
and road
absolutely.
trip down to.
Let me on it. I'm good to go.
If you don't mind. Rick, a real question. We have often talked about this as the fire barn. As you know, in that same complex is police and rescue. And I guess my question is, how should one start referencing this whole concept? Should we increase it just to be able to get to different pots of money? And two, and if we want to cover this later, that's fine. I feel like we made some major strides on the Maritime Center with the work that was done with Newport Collaborative. And I feel like other than words on a page, there's not a whole lot to present around this first responder, fire barn, police, whatever you want to call it. And for a little bit of money, I'm wondering whether that's worth the squeeze, and whether we should have a real presentation of the theoretical, what is it and why is it and how important it is, and tying sea level rise, everything into it so that we can go after as many buckets as possible. Can you just help me out with that?
I can, and the Speaker of the House is calling me as we speak, but that we're in the middle of our meeting here.
I call BS.
There it is. So anyway, no, so I'll get back to the speaker, but so you bring up a good point, Sven, and I would prefer to call the fire barn the public safety building, but I'm not authorized to do that, and I don't want to cause any issues with the fine people that work for the police and other emergency and say, wait a minute, are we moving everything over there? So that's why I haven't called it the public safety building. If you have a term that you think would encompass that, I'd like to do that, but I just kept it as the fire barn with the description that we had a very Marion and I had a very good conversation with the chief and the head of the volunteer department, which are two very fine men, and helped us with this. We talked about affordable housing above it. We talked about what it could do inside, but I'll be more than happy to change the terminology on the fire barn when you think it warrants that.
Well,
I thought this is Martha. I thought we were calling it the Public Safety Complex. I have been for a couple of years now,
Okay.
but that's just me, I guess.
Well, I'll do that, Councilwoman. I didn't know that. I apologize. Yeah.
Well, that may just be me because it was easier than saying the fireplace and somebody's going to get mad because you didn't call it what they belong to. It's just a broader brush. Did we talk about the police station part of it? Because it sounds like our police station is in pretty good shape.
I guess the question, or just to
Well,
build
I-
on Martha's comment, is the complex. So I'm just trying to increase the value of this by.
No, I understand. Well, yeah, but you also don't want to just lose it in minutia. We're on an island. It just doesn't seem as if you can have a better argument for funding for a place where you simply do not have any ability to bring in a backup. Mutual aid, thank you. And I mean, I know I have cousins who are firemen in New York City and other places, and they say that, you guys have got better equipment than we do. And I say, well, yeah, we need to.
But just going on to that though, and maybe I'm the only one here, is it would seem to me that this is a complex, and at least from the way it's been described to me, the rescue is going to end up moving, or fire barn. I mean, this is a pretty big discussion, and I think it's going to impact everybody. I agree with Martha that the police station is in pretty good shape right now, but I'm not sure that there's not value to looking at the whole complex versus just fire. And I'm not trying to position. I'm trying to increase the number of pots that we can go after.
So I have a question. Tomorrow, we're going to hopefully do a tour of that facility with our state representative. But I do have questions because I have heard, pieces of this plan that they have, right? Unfortunately, they've had a lot of plans over the years, and they've had volunteers draw up drawings and nothing has come of it. So my question to you is, like, I would imagine that we stand a better chance of getting funding for a project if somebody can actually look at a plan such as the Harbors facility, right? So we all know that Harbors facility isn't going to end up looking like what we looked at last week, right? Like, but at least there's something to look at. You can picture it, and like, sure, we've gotten letters that it should be further back and include this and include that, right? That's details, but like, at least there's a jumping off point. I feel like we don't have a jumping off point on this public safety building. We just have a lot of chatter. I guess my question for you is, am I right that we stand a better chance if we've got drawings and ideas rather than what we have, which is not much?
So, good question. I think when it comes to the appropriation, they are interested. The appropriation of a building expansion would be where we would get the money. The actual technology and things inside it, those are grant programs. They would not fund, for instance, vehicles for fire or for police. Much of the apparatus, that's all through grants. what our appropriation would do would help with the construction component of expanding the public safety building. We'll start calling it over there. So that's what it'd be. So more of the housing than it would be, and I say housing, more of the foundation, the structure than the actual stuff in it. That would be competitive grants that we would go through, similar to the harbor, that we would be working on that building. We'd be working on the building rather than some of the stuff that's inside it.
Can I just follow up on Molly's question with Marianne? How do we get to the point where we have renderings?
So we'd have to hire an architect to do that. But I would like to ask Rick a question. Last year in the appropriations funds that I applied for, it was all verbiage. They did not ask for any kind of drawings or renderings. So Rick, with this appropriation, do they ask for drawings and renderings as we get further down the pike, or strictly all verbiage? Because I just submitted.
It's verbiage. However, the members of Congress, our 3 members of Congress, our congressmen and 2 senators, probably get 150 requests a year per cycle. With the success of Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse over the last, Congressman Cicilline, over the last 2 years, we saw a list Senator Reid had in the newspaper. More and more entities are asking for it. So the purpose of the renderings was to put our projects above a project from Westerly or Richmond or Providence, and the ability for a member of Congress to see and touch it more than they would if we just did the verbiage. So, for instance, my previous job many years ago, when I worked when I was a district director for Congressman Kennedy, and he was on the Appropriations Committee, we would get application after application after application, and our job was always to fund as much as we can. First thing we did was take all the applications and then put them in. So we'd have the silos, which is 13. There's 13 appropriation bills. So there's 13 different categories, and we would take each one. Then we would say, okay, this one goes in silo 5. This one goes in silo 7. But then when we got to those, okay, there's only 2 in silo 6. So we're going to go for both of them. But there may be 35 in silo 1. And the chairperson of that committee says, you can't, Patrick, for instance, Congressman, you can't give me 35 requests. Tell me what your priorities are. So he has to make a decision on those 35. By having these renderings and having the ability for someone to visualize it, see it, it helps us much more. I think one of the reasons that the medical center did such a good job wasn't this, extra effort there than it was in another area. It was the fact that there was known need. There was a known need on the island for medical attention, medical care, I should say, and the fact that they could see and see it, and putting housing above it like we would for the public safety, it was there too. So my purpose, at least with the new harbor building, would be for them to say, okay, this is important. I worked on the Newport YMCA, which serves all of Newport County, and we were able to get $1 million. And I think one of the things that made them feel that way was they had renderings, plus they came and visited and they saw what would happen. And so we did that. And that's what I would really want to do here as well. So the verbiage is important. That's what ultimately you have to look at. But I think it's human nature, just it's no similar to if you were distributing $50,000 worth of grants by the council, and you all had to make decisions. Sometimes you're not making decisions just based on need, but you're also making decisions on the quick impact. What do I see? How do I do it? And I think that's why we need to. It always helps.
Yeah, so Jim Jeremiah has been working on the site work. So I need to follow up where he is with the site work. And I think, I hate to say this publicly, but I think the fire department was willing to pay for the architect to get the renderings going. So let's
Wait.
follow up with.
Let's get there. Should we put this on an agenda for a February meeting? Yeah. That'd be great. Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have one thing to say, and I know I'm one voice and I'm usually the minority voice on this one. But I think the fire department is so much. I would hate to see this town go down the road of getting money to provide a fancy harbors facility and not have the the fire department funded. I think it would think volumes to the soul of this town, and that would be a death knell.
That's exactly why I've focused on the fire barn.
Appreciate it.
I agree with you, Martha.
And I would just point out, and I think everybody agrees, public safety is the number one priority, and it should be. But there are different pockets, unfortunately, sometimes.
That's the part.
So, yeah,
I understand all that. I'm
I
just,
understand where you're coming from, Councilwoman, absolutely. So let me, so just finishing,
I'm sorry, Rick, I apologize. Let's just talk timing for a minute, because things are gonna have to move pretty quickly. When, in your optimal moment, when would drawings be available, or a sketch would be available? In your desire, Rick?
so here's the thing. I think the paperwork are as Mary Ann said, the verbiage it has to be done first. So it's important to get that in there first, because the appropriations committee is not looking for renderings, they're looking for the verbiage. But shortly thereafter, I think it's important to get it. So when the committee says to a senator or congressperson, hey, we think we have a pocket of money for you on these two projects, but we can only fund one of them. Where's the priority? That's when we want to have the drawing. So ideally, it does not have to be a 3D color presentation on a disc, but having some type of paper would be very helpful by the beginning of March. Again, not the same, not coinciding with the deadline, the verbiage, but within the weeks of that would be very helpful.
Early March was exactly what I just wanted to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just so I'm clear, and it goes back to Martha's point, and I think what I heard you say was the building for the oceans or for the harbor and the fire department are two different buckets of money, and there's no control over saying prioritize this over that if they're different buckets and allocated differently, correct? Because I think it's important, because Martha raised it, if that is the case and we get the money for harbors and not the money for fire, that it's very clear to the public that we put in for both. We don't control what gets approved. So it doesn't look like, oh, the town wanted to be fancy, but yet our infrastructure is falling apart. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Neil, you're 100% correct, and I actually appreciate you pointing it out on the record, because that's exactly correct. I don't think anyone here disagrees, and I can assure you that members of Congress, if given a choice between those two, would certainly go with public safety every time. It's just there's 13 pockets, and I think sometimes the outside forces, sometimes the media will highlight an appropriation. Well, that seems like that's what they were fighting for, but the reality is the federal government is funded in 13 pockets. I'm talking about discretionary money, by the way. I'm not talking about entitlement money like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, but I'm talking about discretionary money that they do every year. And those pockets have money. Some areas, Rhode Island does not do as well. For instance, in Department of Agriculture, Midwestern states like Kansas and Missouri and Nebraska receive a lot more percentage than we will receive. Conversely, we receive a lot more in HUD money, for instance. So, but you're 100% right. The priority is not one over the other. It is one over the other. Public safety, it's just different pockets. Yep, absolutely. Good point. So let me on this, and I appreciate everyone's feedback, and certainly stop me, Keith, when I need to. So that's kind of where we are from the macro level. There has been and everyone needs to know this, and it's not obviously foreign to anyone here. But there's been a lot of federal involvement over the last couple of years specific to the pandemic issue, COVID, money that's been sent to the states and so forth. And there's been a push, I think now, like, okay, we've spent a lot of money, the most money spent in federal, direct money to states since the, only you have to look back to probably the 40s, or 30s during the New Deal, maybe in the social programs of the 60s. But this is the most, and at some point there'll be a check on it. So we may see less money coming in there, which makes things more competitive. But I still think there's ample amount of money. Also, the Congress passed, the president signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which on its surface seems it's just dealing with inflation, but the reality is it was the biggest environmental energy bill ever passed in the country's history. And specific on environmental energy stuff, there's opportunities for numerous things, which I will get to all of you soon. But those things include charging stations at municipal buildings, better transformers to get energy. I have spoken to Jeff Wright and Barbara McMullen on some of the stuff that's available for them as well. So there is, electric vehicles for school buses, town vehicles and so forth, all of which are just starting to come out right now. And I have a briefing on that from a national organization that I'll share from you. So there are some stuff that are being done. But I want to just from the macro, I know we got into the micro on the two issues, which is good. I want to talk about what's going on with the state. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the state has unprecedented amount of money and have surpluses for the last couple of years. To the credit of the leadership on both sides, they have not spent it foolishly. They have been very smart and very meticulous in terms of spending that money. It's one of the reasons that we have the amount of money that we do have, because not all of the pandemic money has been spent right away. That being said, the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, that money has to be spent over a period of time. It has to be allocated by the end of this year and spent 2 years after. So we are really coming up on it. So you'll see a lot more state money available in terms of issues that are important, like housing. As a matter of fact, I met with Rhode Island Housing on Monday on behalf of Cindy Pappas on a grant to increase the housing stock from to up to 16 units. I met with him on Monday. That money is direct result of ARPA. So we're working on that as well. In terms of Block Island at the State House, as you know, we had two very good advocates and Blake Filippi and Sue Cisnowski. Blake has retired. Tina Spears took over. She's not from the island, although she is in Charleston. Her husband's in the fishing industry, and she's taken numerous trips over there throughout the years, both as a vacationer and as through her husband's business. And Elena DeMario is also the new, well, she's not a new state senator, but she's new to the district. But as you all know, you met her before. Both of them, they came during the island, but Senator DeMario has been working with Senator Cisnowski over the last year when she found out redistricting was going to take place. She's very engaged in it. Jeff met with Elena last Friday on numerous issues. We've also had conversations with Tina Spears. I know Representative Spears is coming tomorrow. We'll be on that via remote. And we've already put the legislative pieces that were of interest from last year. Tax classification was an issue for them to be ready for. We're going to formally put everything in after we get the approval from you. But that is an area that we are looking at in terms of what needs to be done. There are other issues I know are important to you, but we've told them to let us have a conversation with all of you before anything is introduced. So they're there. The leadership in the House and Senate are still the same. Senator Ruggiero is the Senate president. Representative Sakachi is the speaker. There is a new Senate Majority Leader, Ryan Pearson. Mike McCaffrey from Warwick retired. He was the number 2. Ryan Pearson, who is was the finance chairman and is now the Majority Leader, is from Cumberland. He will be there as well. And then there's a new finance chair with Senator Pearson going up to Majority Leader, and that's Senator Lou DePalma, who represents Middletown, who is one of the more active and intelligent members of the General Assembly. He's a very, very good person. And so there's some changes in terms of us directly. No town in the state of Rhode Island had a whole change of their legislative delegation, but we did. And they are more interested in listening to us than the previous. And I don't mean that in a bad way, just after 10 years, 12 years of representing the previous senator and representative got it. They knew what they needed to do. So there's going to be a lot of orientation and working with them to let them know what's going on the island, but they're both very eager to help out where it needs to take place.
Thank you, Rick.
Yep.
Um,
And that's a thing, Keith. I gotta, I'd be very interested to hear from people now that we're going into the micro, as you mentioned. What are some of the issues that you would like to see introduced or reintroduced? I know there's some issues that have had small discussions on whether they're at the level that need to be continue to be studied or brought to the General Assembly. Obviously, is what I'd like to hear from all of you.
So we can certainly get into specific issues, but before we lose it, I do think that one of the things I would like to have is a plan for engagement by town council members and professional staff, Marianne and Amy or whomever, around presence in Providence. For example, does it make sense to I'm just making this up, Rick. Does it make sense to have whoever can make it spend 15 minutes with the speaker and 15 minutes with the Senate president, just to sort of say early in the session, we're here and we're paying attention and we have priorities. Where we are not calling and saying, please act on this bill tomorrow, but just sort of establishing the ongoing presence. That seems to me, to the extent that we're talking about a long-term play and long-term relationship building, that having those types of conversations with whomever you and Jeff suggest we have them would be a valuable thing to do in the near term.
I would welcome you all up at the State House, and I think you're right, Keith, to get up there early, have a general conversation. It's in the nature of people, myself, obviously I do this for a living, but when you go up there continually asking,
Right.
and I think at the beginning, I think they would greatly appreciate coming up there and say, just checking in, how are things going? Here are some of the issues that we have. So I do think, meeting early while they have more time is certainly beneficial to actions that we may need later on. So I coming up early one afternoon before session begins and getting a meeting with Senator DeMario and Senator Ruggiero and Senator Pearson would be helpful. Conversely, Representative Spears being in a meeting with the Majority Leader Chris Blajewski and Speaker Sakachi, I think helps. And the respect that you have already, I think helps. I think we'd all acknowledge having Speaker Sakachi on a Zoom call with all of us last year on an issue spoke volumes. And so, yes, I would highly encourage that. Let me tell you about the schedule. They will be in next week and the following 2 weeks after that. And then during school break around the state, which I think is President's Day week, which is that Monday. that following week they'll be out. So that's kind of where we are for two reasons. One, two reasons that's important. One, if we want to meet with them, it would be nice to meet with them beforehand. Two, while we introduced legislation in March, April last year, the Speaker and the Senate President strongly like to have all bills in during right before they go on break. So they haven't mentioned it yet, but they have a soft introduction deadline of bills, usually that Friday before President's Day. Doesn't mean they won't extend it. They've always extended it well, not always, but most of the time they've extended it. Doesn't mean we can't get it in, but certainly bills that are important that will involve a lot of debate and aren't something easy like a tax reval, which we did last year, may take a little bit longer. So we might want to get them in, which gives us about 3 weeks to start getting ideas of where we are.
We're very much in your hands on that, yours and
Okay.
Jeff's. I mean, I think it doesn't have to be all five, plus Marianne plus Amy. So, we're also in your hands in terms of size of the group, but
So let me talk about the size of the group, Keith, because I think it's important. I think you would speak volumes. The more that came, usually on these big events, I say, oh, we only need one or two. And certainly I'm respectful of the first and second warden in terms of their positions. But the more that can be up there, I think it shows a unified front. It also shows, in other areas of the state, they won't do what you'll do.
great.
There's a belief that your trip from Block Island to the city of Providence in the winter is similar to our immigrants coming over in the late 1800s. So let's play that up.
We'll wear our sealskins.
Yes, let's play that up, and I'll meet you with a horse and carriage. Yes.
Would that be related to the fact that you're not here?
Yes, I would. That's a well said, Sven. Although the meteorologist told me that everything was closed.
I think strategically having that day early in the session, understanding that it's maybe one of a few is important. So please know that setting that up is a priority for us. Okay.
It'll be the first thing I do when we get off.
Great. Thank you, Rick.
Yep.
Sven, do you want to lead a conversation on tax, or tell me how you'd like? How would you? We had a meeting, Rick, for your background last week, was it? Just to sort of kick around priorities, some of which we've already talked about. We definitely want to talk water and some other stuff, but obviously one of the critical ones is getting the legislature to pass this tax classification flexibility law that you guys successfully got through the Senate unanimously, and then met headwinds in the House. That I don't know how you want to do that, but that's obviously a critical one, and maybe we should spend some time on that.
So my suggestion would be, and just obviously, three of us were very involved in that conversation, Molly and Neil. I think we should bring them up, and I'm actually going to look to Amy to do that a little bit, because I think Amy can describe things very clearly. And then I think we should really talk about sort of, whether it's here or another session, how we go about this, because I don't know that we hit headwinds, Rick, in the House. I actually think the House was very much leaning in the direction, and our representative was leaning the right direction, but somehow it just never made it to the floor, and we all know why, right? So it was lobbyists hired by Steve Filippi and a group of people who were sort of against it without knowing a lot about it. And so I think we need to do a lot of work here to make sure that people are aware and that the facts are out there. But I think as an intro, Amy, if you wouldn't mind just sort of going over and and we don't have any of those handouts or all that, but if you can sort of describe it, especially for Neil and Molly, but also for all of us, just to make sure we're back to grounded.
Sure,
Thank
and so I really do think we probably want to agenda this on a separate council session to go through some of those materials and some of them, I think so. The light is on. Better. The green light's on. I did listen to your discussion from last week, and I think that you covered a lot of the theory that came out of last year's discussion. And in terms of conversation with Rick, the important part of the takeaway there is that what we were looking for was flexibility to have that discussion. That we weren't proposing a specific framework. We were really looking for the ability to consider what the right solution might be for Block Island. And we still have to have a lot of conversations about what that final structure might look like. There are, I think, as you talked about, there's the homestead, which we can do today. There are some parameters around a multi-tier system and what the limits are of 1.5 times another classification, things like that. But we weren't going into that bill request with a presumption of exactly what it would look like. We wanted the flexibility to evaluate that as a community. And I think that was one of the frustrations, that we were asking a very open, curious question about how this might look best. I think the details we can get into, and you probably have really specific questions about what some of those options look like. But for this context, what other information can I help provide?
One of the things that I think would be very helpful, and I'm sorry to be presumptuous with Neil and Molly, but talking for a minute, Amy, if you don't mind, about what is currently permitted under the statute in terms of flexibility for towns, and the fact that really what we're talking about is a refined Block Island solution for this, if you don't mind.
Sure, and I don't have it all off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
yeah,
so-
that's fine.
So bear with me. And so it starts with that basic foundation of the 4% cap, which, Molly, I know you're familiar with. Neil, you're probably getting up to speed. And that applies across all of the tax classifications. So it applies the entire levy of the town. And that's a really important part of this classification discussion, because at the end of the day, it doesn't change the total tax revenue that the town can collect. It's really about shifting across the different classifications. And those are generally residential, commercial, multifamily, and tangible, I think. Is it? And so those 4 classifications are allowed. And many communities, I think it might be as many as half at this point, have some sort of accommodation under the state statutes that talk about either differential tax rates or the amount by which those differ across those 4 classifications. And so we're looking for that same flexibility that exists in almost, half of the other communities, to be able to consider ratios between the classes and what might be appropriate, and really taxing one differently than another.
So can I ask you a question really quick? So when I was looking at Newport has a different tax rate for a home that is occupied 12 months out of the year than it does for a home that is rented for any part of the year. Is that allowed under state law, or is that an exception?
That is an exception. I believe Newport's might have passed last session. So they just pursued that. They already had a differential tax rate. So they had a different rate for commercial and residential. And then they implemented a new program that considers this year-round occupancy. And they really followed Middletown on that. So you're seeing more and more communities introduce that concept in their flexible tax statutes. It's not just a differential rate. It also starts to talk about exemptions based on year-round occupancy.
So that's sort of a tier 2
it's another element to the tiering. And I believe Middletown and Newport are structured as exemptions, not as, it's separate from their differential rates. That makes sense.
So I'm not sure who this is directed to, just so I understand. So we went to propose something that we didn't have details on, and we had to ask permission to build details. How does that work?
That's enabling legislation.
Yeah, it's enabling legislation. So basically, we had parameters, and I'll make one of the parameters that Amy talked about, that no tax rate could be more than 1.5 times another tax rate, right? So sticking with the 4% for a minute, if one went to 3 and that was the lowest, the next one couldn't be more than 1.5 times that, right? So anyway, we can do, I believe, homestead, and we can do some commercial under current state law. But the idea and the desire was to be able to say, okay, what about year-round renters, or giving them a benefit, right? Hey, I'm renting a room, or I'm renting my house year-round to a year-round resident versus summer rentals or where they live. So we wanted that flexibility. We went to the State House, and Amy or I can share the documents that we did, with a plan to get the enabling legislation to let us as a community have the discussion as to what we wanted.
And then vote on it.
And then as a community, right,
Here's what we're.
right, rather than going to daddy and saying, here's our plan, because we may not get that, right? They may not even allow it. Senate passed it immediately. House was very open about it. And then suddenly it's sort of a wave of sort of led by Steve, just saying, we don't want to have a discussion about it.
I have to say, the speaker could not have been better and more respectful. It was very frustrating, and he knew that and was very attentive to that. But basically, there's a bit of a chicken and egg associated with it, Neil, to answer, to sort of, so do you go through an entire exercise in the community where you construct a new tax system and then ask the legislature to approve it without knowing whether they will? Or do you ask them for permission to have flexibility and then create that and vote on it?
Last year, Rick, you can correct me. Last year, I think there were 5 or 6 communities that went through this in the whole year. One wasn't approved.
Yeah, so yeah, just quickly for Neil's background, this is becoming a little bit more common. The last couple of years, communities have asked for the same stuff. Amy laid out pretty good, no different than what other communities are trying to do. And the town of Middletown, town of Johnston, town of Cumberland, all had the exact same stuff we were trying to do. All 3 of them passed. The Senate passed it with literally no opposition. We were the only people that went up and actually spoke on it. Some of your colleagues were up there testifying on the bill, including some of the former members of the council. There was no issues. It got passed. And then a businessman from your community thought that this was going to change the tax structure, which it did not. It was in no way was it going to do anything other than what was just laid out. But unfortunately, he hired a lobbyist. They came up and were able to get the bill stopped on the House side, even though the Senate had already passed it. The bill was no different than what was being done in Johnston, Middletown, and Cumberland.
I think a lot of that dynamic has changed.
I
hope.
think you're right.
Keith, can I, just for some
Please, Amy,
mechanical
yeah.
clarification, what happens at the state level with that enabling legislation? That language is fairly broad. And so it is important to know that when it comes time to implement that plan at the local level, that happens through an ordinance mechanism, and it becomes much more refined. So that becomes a very specific ordinance that goes through a public hearing process that requires a lot more detail, input, and vetting. And that's really where we wanted that element of control. The enabling legislation is some pretty flexible.
Correct.
And
Absolutely.
that's key. That's real
Yeah,
key,
yeah,
because
you're
it
right,
becomes a
Karen.
local decision then. All the General Assembly is giving us is permission And then we need to bring it back here, home to the residents and say, okay, this is what we're talking about. Hold a public hearing. In the public hearing, you could tweak it, you could change it. And then it becomes a local decision. All they're doing is giving us permission. It
And
doesn't
is that
give us
a
what to do
come
anything.
to us a town vote or that's a town council vote?
It goes to a public ordinance, which you hold a public hearing, and ultimately the council does vote.
Okay.
Make that
I,
final
but
decision.
for what it's worth, I would view this as a potentially lengthy exercise to talk about this stuff, Neil. I don't have any, I mean, I think I have some philosophical leanings, but I haven't, I haven't really sort of worked through what the various categories ought to be and exactly how they ought, I mean, but that's part of the reason that it doesn't make sense to have the conversation before we even know whether the legislature is going to let us do it,
However, I'm sure there's only so many models out there that are working in towns, right? That there's a way to kind of say, here's what's out there.
I think it might be you've seen one town, you've seen one town.
Yeah, there are a limited number of models, maybe 8 to 10 examples in Rhode Island, but that doesn't mean that everything's been thought of.
I will say, we did not do a great job in the process of having a number of sort of public agenda items. I don't know that it was well explained in the very beginning, and that created a bit of a, knee jerk and so I think Keith's point and Amy's point is, we need to start that on agendas. We need to be very, I mean, nobody intended not to be transparent, but I think there were some people who were like, I didn't know anything about this, and no, because that's a safer answer.
Well, I'm going to have to agree with you because I go to a lot of went to a lot of town council meetings as a community member, and I don't even have the vaguest recollection about this. I don't know what I missed. So anyway, my question for Rick would be, do you think our chances are better this year putting this forward?
Molly, that's a great question. Here's why. The lobbyist that they hired has a very strong relationship. He's a former state senator and very strong in the Senate. Candidly, the bill passed the Senate because no one in the General Assembly, except for Senator Sosnowski, who introduced it, cared. To everybody in the state Senate, it was like, okay, this is a local decision. Why are we're giving them, just like, we're giving them the enabling opportunity to do that. But the bill passed with no issues. I'm curious to see if we get the same. Just because it passed the Senate unanimously last time doesn't mean we'll get it this time, because theoretically, if the businessman from Block Island decided to hire someone, their strength is more in the Senate than it is in the House. I do think we're going to have to do a better job of getting to explain it more of what we're trying to do. And I think members of the council would be helpful in getting local businesses and people interested in letters of support saying, we welcome a conversation. That's all this does. So I wish I could say, Molly, that it's going to happen. We got this, normally I would say, oh, we got the Senate because we got them last time. I'm not so sure we have them. I think we got the bill passed because no one seemed to care. And then, Steve decided that it was a potential threat to taxes on his business. And that's when he got involved.
We've also in the past, I was involved in things a long time ago, and back then, things would just fly through the Senate.
Yeah.
Because everyone knew full well it wasn't going to pass in the House, and the senator had more juice than the rep.
Yeah.
So and it was just this political reality. It's
it's a great point. And sometimes one chamber will pass something on the other one. I assure you, if a lobbyist had not been hired to stop this, who was a former state senator, I assure you this bill would have passed 100%, guaranteed. Lock it in. What it did was it gave pause. And then when we met with this speaker, he said, I argued that, well, you're allowing this in Cumberland, Johnston, and Middletown. It's the same thing. The only difference is we all came and showed up. his argument was, well, you also were the only community that had someone that came and testified against the bill.
Yeah, but didn't we also have a rep who was like suing people in the assembly? last
Certainly,
year?
yes, and it continues
So,
to. It really did
it's-
help.
We
That's
had
how-
everything working against
Well,
us.
there's that.
Yeah, yes, well, there's that, yes.
So not to go down a rabbit hole, but what was the ultimate argument that swayed them that this shouldn't have been approved?
That before we grant them enabling legislation, that we should see if we could come to some agreement or talk to those members that are opposed to the enabling legislation, to let them know that the legislation only grants an opportunity for a discussion at the local level. So that would be what we need to do now, which is to talk to those opponents, saying that we're putting the legislation in again because of the deadline when we have to get it in, but very clear what we want to do on this. And there was an editorial, Neil, from the Block Island Chamber of Commerce that was opposed to this legislation. And then Sven had a conversation with them and they changed course, but it was due to a more expanded conversation, which is what we have to do this year before the bill gets introduced. And we have editorials or people saying that this will do that. I think there's a belief, and I think there's a belief by this businessman that the only way to stop any type of tax reclassification that may not be beneficial to his business or what he views as businesses in the community is stopping at the state level. And the fact that while it's only enabling legislation, this council will do something that may be detrimental to his business. And rather than engage in local government and petition his cause, it's easier just to stop the process to allow you to have that conversation.
Rick, have you thought through it all, whether this should start in the House or Senate?
Well, I think I'm hopeful that we can have a conversation. One of the things I think would be helpful, and I can't, I have to be careful here, but I feel pretty strongly that the Senate president and the Senate and the speaker would hold off, even though they have a deadline, would allow us to have a larger dialogue before we introduce that legislation. So I will get conversations with both of them saying, we know the deadline's coming up, but we, believe strongly in having a conversation with all people that have concerns with what we're trying to do first. Can we hold off on the legislation till we have those conversations? I feel very strongly they would say, we appreciate that because we prefer the legislation when it comes to us move forward rather than having to deal with this in advance. So yes.
Thank you, Rick.
And Sven, I don't want to, but it would maybe helpful since you have taken the lead on it from a council standpoint, and Amy, I know, has been working on it. I'd have no problem meeting with that businessman or anyone else to discuss exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think to my comment earlier, we need, and we have not done this yet, we need to put a plan together, all the council, to go out and do a number of outreach programs, which includes agended items on the council, but really then have a meeting with the chamber and a meeting with other businesses and all businesses, and really get out there and make sure it's clear what the intent is. And there are going to be some people that don't support it, and that's part of life, but as long as the majority of the major businesses support it, then I think we're in good shape. So we need to do that over the next week or two, put a plan together, and then put it, literally get it going in February and March.
Yep. And I'll have a conversation when I make these calls to set up meetings with the leadership for the, soon. I'll also bring this issue up. So when I call them, I'll say I have two issues to discuss. A, can we get a meeting just in general? B, can we introduce this legislation a little bit later with the intention of having good conversations with those that may have some concerns with this bill.
This is the kind of thing we should do before we do liquor licenses. Because everybody's gone now and by the time they get back, they're going to be cranking to get their businesses
That's a
running.
really good point. Yeah.
My hope would be, and Martha, you're exactly right. My hope would be we can do a number of these by Zoom. Because there are a number of people around, not here. But you're right. Yep.
Hey, Rick, one of the one of the issues that and this is a bit of state and federal both. And by the way, we do want to talk housing before we let you go, but one of the issues that's likely to be confronting us over the next period of time are some rather significant questions around water. And potentially the town and the water district having to make fairly substantial capital available for water infrastructure expansion. And I'm curious about the extent. We'll certainly be in the U.S. Department of Agriculture grant process, but I'm curious whether you see there might be other opportunities to get to get money to do that.
So I guess the first question I have, and I'm writing this down, but has anyone reached out to the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank? Water's a big issue to everybody in the state. The Infrastructure Bank has provided millions and millions of very low income, low interest loans. There's been more money pumped into the infrastructure bank than there ever has been. And water is becoming a big issue. And municipalities have gone to this bank to get funding to do this. The city of Providence is involved with it right now because obviously one of the issues they have is lead paint, which is the pipes from the main water main on a street that goes into someone's home. But so that would be the first thing on that. But I can certainly look at other programs that do that in terms of capacity and so forth. I do know that there's been appropriations and federal dollars for infrastructure change for whether it's, wastewater or normal water, whether it's drinking water or wastewater, storm drains, and other areas. I know for some of the work we did in Middletown years ago on wastewater, there was I forget what you call the program, but there was money to do infrared on wastewater and so forth. So the answer is yes, but I'll work with Mary Ann in the short term just to get a meeting set up with the infrastructure bank and then have a larger discussion with you and your water department. But that would be the first place to go. I know that a lot of municipalities are looking at this issue.
Thank you.
Rick, just so you know, we've already reached out to Relly, who's now working with Capit RI.
Yep.
With the water. So we've given her a bunch of information. So she's going to start looking for some grant opportunities also for us.
Great. And Relly, just so everyone knows, Relly is a former 16-year staffer for Senator Whitehouse, and she handled all his appropriations and federal money. And she's partnered with us on a number of things, and we'll be working on that. So that's good. That's good to know as well. She's not officially working in our office, but we've partnered on some stuff, and that's good to know that you're working through her with an agency.
So I would like to talk about housing, but if there's anything else people want to throw in, feel free. So I know how closely you've been working with Cindy. A bit of the fact that you were with Cindy at Rhode Island Housing tickles my brain that we probably need to agenda in February a conversation with the Affordable Housing Board, just sort of about the current status of that project, so that the council and the community are aligned on that. But I'm assuming that the appointment of Stefan Pryor is meant to indicate that things are going to start moving there. Is that correct, Rick? Do you think?
I think that's exactly why it's going to happen. I think the governor recognizes the problem of housing. I think he always has, but I think the demonstrations in the housing camps that were set up on the State House grounds certainly put that focus more in, or media people continually asking him what he was doing in terms of homelessness and housing in general. And he has done a good job in terms of putting money into the program. Unfortunately, Josh Saul, who is somebody that many of us met with as soon as he got appointed, did not answer the bell in terms of the task before him. And I think that was one issue. And I also think it was an easy to identify somebody as the reason it hasn't happened. So I don't want to call him the fall guy. I think there were issues, but nonetheless, he's not there. Stefan Pryor is somebody who will be very involved with it. He's a can-do kind of person. I think he wants to, there's no secret he was a candidate for treasurer and has interest in continuing to be involved in public service and maybe running for office again. So this is something I think he knows he has to answer the bell. And so I do think he will definitely be there. And actually, I have a list of things that I want to do for the town, and he's already on this. So I'm hoping to get a call with him to talk about the uniqueness of Block Island on that. Let me just make one correction too, Keith. I met with Rhode Island Housing on Monday. Cindy put the application in last week and gave me the heads up on it, and Mary Ann sent me all the information.
Sure.
So so rather than have her come up to Providence, I met with him separately. But Cindy and I had a conversation before that meeting, and then I had it with him. And I haven't had a chance to call Cindy, so if she's watching this meeting, the housing said that they are reviewing them right now, and a letter of deficiency will go out to all applicants. And what that means is a letter of deficiency just means, on page 16, line 4, you didn't check this off or you didn't explain it. Once that, they'll go out to tighten up those applications. But when I told them what was planned, 8 duplexes, 16 houses, 16 housing units, 2 ADA compliant facilities, they were very excited about it. And they knew, based on the conversation we had, what an impact 16 affordable housing units could have on the island.
Right. And I guess that's terrific. I guess one of the questions I have about Pryor is that I felt like we did, at least initially, make some progress with Saul around sort of the unique challenges that we have, and the extent to which relatively small amounts of money, small amounts of movement in the context of the state budget, the impact that has on Block Island's issue. And I'm curious if you think we should have a similar introductory conversation with Pryor and Cindy and whatever cast we decide, just to have that conversation so that Block Island remains on their minds.
Absolutely. And only in Rhode Island, although, as you know, he's a Connecticut native.
I do indeed.
Those Connecticut natives have a good job of coming over to Rhode Island and taking over. But I only in Rhode Island. Stefan Pryor and I both serve on the Rhode Island Red Cross board, and we have a lunch today at I'm saying, we have a board meeting today at lunchtime at 12. And it's remote, but I'm hoping he's on it because I wanted to pick his brain on a few things and follow up. So the answer is hopefully I'll see him today, and I will ask to get a meeting within the next 10 days with whoever you deem to be on that with Cindy.
Great. Terrific. Thank you. What else do we have, guys?
I think it's probably worth to at least talk about mopeds or not, or the lack of ability to talk, because as yesterday evidenced, it was in the Supreme Court.
Yes.
What happened?
The oral arguments occurred on
Oh,
the ordinance.
No decision, I think.
No. That'll be 17 years
Well,
from now.
I think there's a broader problem. And I've been involved in this since the 80s, and I've long maintained that if mopeds disappeared tomorrow, it would take a while for people to even realize it because everything would still be such a mess. And that's only gotten worse. I don't know what other places do, what other places are able to do. People talk about electric bicycles, and then you say, well, the problem with that is you don't have any licensing whatsoever. We now have electric scooters, not scooters like little Vespas, but actual old-fashioned board on two-wheel scooters. We have these strange things that I don't understand at all that look like a single wheel. It's not a unicycle. What are those? What does anybody call those?
I think they're called like hoverboards or something.
The
But
hoverboard,
they go
hoverboard, Keith.
they go 40 miles an hour.
Well, they go faster than they should. And now our roads are all state roads, and or most of them are state roads. We get funding for the town roads. So are we just stuck with all these things, or can we just say we can't have them in the village? Or is there any way we can have any kind of flexibility like that?
So I want to bring something up, and I'm sorry I had my head down. There's a bill, and I was looking at it the other day, H 5220. It's sponsored by Representative Kilsack, who represents the East Side. Included in that sponsorship is Tina Spears. And what the bill will do is it will, the definition is the act would regulate electric bicycles in the same manner as human-powered bicycles, classify electric bicycles into 3 classes, and require all electric bicycles to have a technical information label affixed to the bicycle. The act would also require that electric bicycles be equipped with a speedometer and would restrict electric bicycles to be capable of maximum speeds of over 28 miles per hour. It would also allow the use of electric bicycles or bicycle trails and paths. So this would reclassify bikes, Martha, as you just said. There may be an opportunity to amend this, but there's always an opportunity to amend it. So this is what they would do, and this is going to on the electrical side of bicycles. And now it doesn't say vehicles, but I guess the question is what defines an electric vehicle. But there will be 3 classes of electric bikes. One would be ones equipped with electric motors that provide assistance only when the rider is pedaling. 2 would be bicycle equipped with a throttle acute electrical motor that ceases to provide assistance when the electric bicycle reaches 28 miles an hour. And the 3rd classification would be bicycles equipped with an electric motor that provides assistance only when the rider is pedaling, and that ceases to provide assistance when the electric bicycle reaches 20 miles or more. So, so there is legislation. Tomorrow it may be worth whoever meets with Tina Spears to ask her about this legislation.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
We will. Terrific. And on the moped issue, as we've discussed, given the expiration of the federal consent agreement, we are now, as are the moped operators, free to seek legislation enabling the town to more robustly regulate or less robustly regulate, presumably. So I guess we would ask you to, not that you wouldn't, to pay attention to that and stay tuned as we have our own conversations around, including you, around whether it's advisable for us to, for example, seek legislation that imposes or enables the town to impose some more modernized safety requirements around the moped issue.
Yes, that is a conversation that I expect to have, that's a conversation I expect that you all to have, and we're prepared to react with legislation, pursuant to whatever safety measures or thoughts you have on that.
Okay.
And knowing that time is precious for everybody in the legislature, it would seem to me that there's opportunities for discussions prior to having legislation or prior to having a bill that we move forward. And I'm wondering whether that's something we should start sooner than later.
So when we, yes, in addition to it sounds to me, Sven, that in addition to some time we would like to have on the tax classification, we can add this issue as well. These would be the two.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that anybody will be very excited to have an official conversation when it's still pending in the Supreme Court, but I think it's always good to make sure everybody's as educated and understanding of public safety and health and sort of the overall drivers versus just, I don't like this or that. And I think understanding those underpinnings takes a while, and is worth a conversation with everybody.
Well, except that it would not surprise me if, for example, the city of Providence were interested in a comprehensive sort of non-car piece of legislation, regulatory legislation. For example, so Providence has some of the same problems that a lot of municipalities across the country have with unlicensed ATVs, dirt bikes, etc. So I guess, yes, I understand the Supreme Court argument. On the other hand, if there is an active conversation occurring, I want to make sure that we're a part of it.
I have reached out to the mayor of Providence, who I've known for years. It is a priority for him to curtail this, and I'm waiting to see what type of legislation he would introduce on this. I expect to see him tonight at an event that's being put on for the Senate president, and so I'll certainly talk to him during that time. I know they're looking at ways to eliminate the issues they're having, which is pretty serious.
There may be a coalition opportunity there, I guess.
Correct. Correct.
Anybody? Oh, go ahead.
I have on a totally different topic.
Good.
Yeah. And we need to have more conversation about this before obviously it goes forward, but I'm very interested in looking at short-term rental ordinance of some sort. Is that something that needs to be done legislatively, or is that something we do locally?
I definitely want to look at that. The answer for me is, I don't know. I'm not sure what we're enabled to do. And so to your point, we
Do you
need
know?
to talk about that.
Rick, do you know?
Yeah. So yes, I'd like to talk about it to an extent. I'm not an I wish, like I said, I wish Jeff was on the call, but like I said, he had a meeting this morning. It hasn't got out of, but anyway, it's become an issue around the state. You've seen just as recently as Tuesday, I think it was, the city of Warwick was dealing with that issue. A couple council members were dealing as well. It's a big problem, Molly. It's a problem obviously in towns like Narragansett and Quinnick Island are dealing with it. There's been discussion of to create a registry to make sure those taxes are collected. But what we're finding is there's ways to get around it. So for instance, I could be advertising my home in Block Island for a rental for 2 weeks in August. And then all of a sudden that person now becomes friendly enough where they want to rent it next year. And we say, let's just do it, on the side, not as formal. There's that. There's the issues with the Airbnb. So this is an issue that's happening around the state, and candidly, it hasn't been rectified. There was supposed to be a taxation was supposed to recoup the money on these rentals, short-term rentals. There was supposed to be Department of Business Regulation was supposed to be monitoring what was being advertised in magazines or newspapers for this stuff on the website. That hasn't gone. So this is something, and I know you mentioned at the beginning, Smiley, that you want to, not ready today, but want to have a discussion. This is something that's very, very hot right now around the state, and we can certainly or should be involved in the conversations as well. Let me go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say from the research that I've done on this, it seems like a lot of towns have an adversarial position on rentals, whereas I would say on Block Island, we have a very different relationship with rentals. Like, we rely on rentals. A house rental is how most of us ended up coming here. And in the research I did, we have the highest percentage of homes being rented on a short term. So I'm not looking at this as an adversarial thing, the way that Narragansett and Westerly are looking at like the college rentals and
That's a
wanting
good
to really
point.
tamp things down. We don't have wild situations out here that we need to tamp down on. So I'm looking at this as like more of a way to regulate illegal rentals that are zoning infractions. Like right now, our zoning official can't inspect those. But if we had a short-term rental functionality, she could, as a violation of a short-term rental instead of a violation of zoning. It would also give us a better resource to make sure that everybody's paying the 1% towards the affordable housing tax, which would then give the Affordable Housing Board more income. Because right now, not everybody's paying that. So I'm just looking at it as more of like a way to regulate our rentals in terms of like, and we don't even know, like as a town, we don't even know who's renting a
Yeah.
town. And the DBR has just started doing this registration, but they're not sharing that information with towns. That's their information that they're not sharing with any town. So that's all I'm looking at right now, but I'm
No,
wondering how we proceed.
I'm happy you brought that up and like to work with you on that. Let me ask a quick question. You mentioned the 1%. If I was to rent a house in Block Island, and I pay a sales tax on that, there's a 1% local tax to Block Island for affordable, that goes to affordable housing, at least is that what I'm hearing?
But it's on the homeowner, not the renter.
Well, it may be, if the homeowner knows they have to pay it, so they may incorporate it in their rent. They may or may not, but it's also on a voluntary basis where, excuse me, it's perceived to be voluntary, which is
And it's more perceived the more times we say that.
You're right. I apologize. They have to file a piece of paper with the town saying that they rented.
Well,
They have to file it with
Amy
the
was
town.
pointing out that it is required.
It is required. It's not as well tracked. I think we should put this on February, March agenda, Keith, and because we should start really figuring out what it is we want to go.
so
after.
just to give, I don't want to cause alarm here, but just to give you an idea, in Massachusetts, to rent a house, there's a mass rental tax, which is 5.7%. And there's a Nantucket rental tax, which is 6%. So people are paying 11.7% to rent houses on Block Island or, I'm sorry, on Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard. So 5.7 Massachusetts rental tax and a 6% Nantucket rental tax.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I did confirm from our last conversation, anyone who's renting rooms through Airbnb, on the island are paying the same as an inn or a hotel. So they pay the 13%.
Oh, they do.
It just comes back a different way, the way the money comes. So the state directly gives the tourism council in the town that percentage. It just comes a different route, but it ultimately is getting back.
So they collect and then distribute back.
But that's,
Correct.
that's
But
rooms.
that's rooms, not house rental.
And Nantucket had this whole short-term rental thing, and I don't even remember where that ended, or if it's still ongoing. And that's a month or 2 weeks, or what is it?
Yeah, what considers, yeah, I don't know if that's 2 weeks.
Their whole thing was societal, and they were trying not to have short-term, which they were looking at as less than a month, I think.
No, I think, I didn't bring it with me, but I believe it ended up being anything less than 30 days. I don't remember exactly. Some of these are 30 days, some are 31, some are 29, depending on the town. So anything short of a month is qualified as a short-term rental. And some towns are, short-term rental, I think it's not what we would want to call it, right? We want to call it like a vacation rental because I do feel like we have a different relationship with these than certainly don't want our real estate agents to feel like we're being adversarial with them. This is more of an organizational thing.
I think one of the,
Management.
I do think, Molly, one of the things to think about that I'm hearing is happening around the country, I don't know, is these just large corporations buying homes and so it's not the person who's got a home in Block Island that loves Block Island and can't really get out there till the month of August, so they rent it out in June and July. It's these corporations that purchase a house and just treat it as a rental. I'm hearing that that's become very prominent a number of places in the Northeast that are just, it's, large corporations buying 10 houses and then just renting them out. But they're companies, they're not someone who's subsidizing their mortgage on a dream house they have on an island that someday they hope to retire to.
Well, I think we've got things that are way in between that. People who have 2 or 3 houses out here who rent the houses and, and don't live here. And,
Yeah.
I'm on social media and I follow some of these people with their pretense of this is our house, we live here. Oh, we'll see you in September. Well, you don't live here, stop it. And we're not yet to the mega corporations that they have in a place like Nantucket, but it's just as insidious, I think.
Yeah.
So I would like to agenda this, but I'd also like it not to be an hour-long agenda item where we sort of chat about it. So one of the things that I would like that is always a source of confusion maybe for me is getting a sense from our solicitors what we are either depending on how you look at it, what we're prohibited from doing or what we're able to do under the statute, under the existing statutes. That doesn't mean that we're even considering doing anything, but if, for example, the state registry law somehow preempts doing a local registry law, we should know that, that sort of thing.
So one of our solicitors, James, also works in Narragansett, so he's really into this deep. So
Great.
I think he'd be the one that would probably be best to advise us.
Great.
I think it would be nice, and I know Allison's plate is rather full, so maybe there's even an outside person. It would be great to have somebody present to the council what's going on around the state, or maybe to Rick's point, Massachusetts, like what's out there, and it may be all adversarial, but I feel like we're sort of picking things up one at a time, or depends on who read what, and it would be nice to just have a briefing as to the layout and the things have changed so much in the last 2.5 years on this issue. So if we could do that and then have James do the legal part, that would be a really informative 20 minutes.
So Keith asked me to do that at the last meeting and I have. So
So you can
I
do that then
did
when
not
James-
bring that notebook with me because it doesn't really pertain to this meeting, but I
Yep.
can certainly tell you
Yes.
what everybody is doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also think we should more formally sort of contemplate what the existing tax flow is. Just to sort of set everybody's base at the same place, that the 1% is required, how that works, what Neil just explained to us that if you're renting a room, it's different than if you're renting a house. We have, I think, a really interesting question around what constitutes a commercial property.
Well, yeah,
You know-
and I
you know-
think.
you know, I
think-
mean, well, right. I mean, it's just, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, and I think Martha raised the confusion of what people think they're paying, what they're supposed to pay. Because if you think about it, now that we know the answer on VRBO or those, they're paying the 13%. So they think whatever they're doing is covered by that, right? But that's a room. You can also rent for a week block, and then technically you're a week rental. And you're
Right.
not submitting your 1% to the town because you think your number's probably
Right,
included
right,
in the
right.
VRBO handoff. So again, I think clarity for everyone
Right.
is needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just would like it to be, I totally, I think we, all five of us agree, it's a conversation we need to have. And, it may be multiple conversations, but I would like to start with sort of I hate level set, it's such corporate speak, but, sort of so that we all understand and have some experts who we can ask questions about, ask questions. And
So Molly,
et cetera.
did you reach out to other towns, or you're just kind of canvassing whatever's out on the internet, or for what people are doing?
Well, I don't know if we need to get in this and burn up all Rick's time on this, but like, I was just curious whether it was something that needed to go through legislatively or if this is a local ordinance thing. I don't know what the process is. So far, no, I've printed out all of their ordinances and application forms and read a million articles and listened to some podcasts and joined some online groups. So that's what I've done so far. But I'm certainly still looking into it. It's only been a week. I just am not sure what I'm asking not that we're doing the process now, right? Because we need to have a bigger conversation, but I'm just curious if Rick can tell me what is the process? Do we need to go to the State House for this? Did I know Narragansett is talking about it right now, but like Newport has gone through the process. Was that a local thing or did they have to do something legislatively?
So I think you bring up a good point that you're less adversarial. I don't want to, that's wrong. You're not adversarial as it may appear in a college town like Narragansett where URI's, close, or in a large, vacation national place like Newport. But my guess is it depends what you need. So if it's just local ordinance stuff, I think you're fine. If becomes an issue of tax collection and things like that, then I think you would need the General Assembly's assistance. So again, you're just starting to study this right now. I don't know if you would need any legislation if you're looking for certain zoning things. I'll find out more about it. It's a good question. Molly, if you want to fire, you've now, I guess, become the expert on this, on the council and in this whole conversation. If you want to fire off 3 or 4 questions, feel free to email me. I'll get answers for them. I'd like to say I have an answer for this. I don't, but I can certainly ask, the powers that be if it needs legislative action on 2 or 3 things that you might want to do.
And assuming that we agenda this in February, Rick, it might be worthwhile to have Jeff or you call in for that portion of the meeting,
Yep.
both so that you can listen and if we need your expertise.
Absolutely.
Rick, before we let you go, I just want to tell you how valuable I think yours and Jeff's work on behalf of the town has been. And
Appreciate that.
frankly, it comes through maybe because I've spent more time with you over the last couple of years, but it really does come shining through how passionate you are about our island and our community and how interesting our challenges are. And that was a big part of the reason that we selected you is because we thought you were going to be that kind of advocate, and that's exactly what we found. So thank you.
I appreciate those words, and I also appreciate the council for extending our relationship through the spring and into the summer. So thank you. I look forward to working with everybody and look forward to working with Molly and Neil as we go forward. I will make sure I can do all I can to be at the next meeting in person. I was told by Jeff Wright when I was talking about another issue that he got sick coming back, and I figured if someone who lives on the island was getting sick, I probably should reserve my my time on a ferry till next time. Although Sven is questioning my
I was on that same boat.
Well,
If he got sick.
and
he's
just-
gotta
just
be
for
on
the
island
record,
more.
Jeff Wright is from Vermont. He's not.
Okay. Okay. Well, I would when Councilman Rysam is questioning my digestive system on days like today, I have to toughen up a little bit.
I was
Maybe
gonna
I'll-
say, maybe he had something bad to eat.
Maybe my the contract should be Dramamine included in that. So, but thank you for those kind words. And again, I'm always available. If someone wants to reach out to me individually, they can do that. And it's really been a pleasure working and continuing working with you and look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. Say hi to Jeff. Take care.
Will do. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Bye.
Molly, so that we don't drop this, why don't you and I work over the next few days on sort of what we'd like that agenda item to look like on short-term rentals?
Right.
Okay.
Right, so I think like when I emailed you and
Yeah.
I think what we have to narrow down. That's what
I think it's a-
So,
it's a
sorry, I
really
didn't have
well-
this on, but,
Yeah.
so what I've discovered so far is that other people have a very different why, right? Ours is more of like a zoning, structure, in talking to the zoning official to find out that, if people build a structure under what we call the bunkhouse regulation,
Mm-hmm.
like she's not allowed to just go and inspect it,
Right.
right? However, if we had this in place, she could inspect it, right? And then she could say to them, this is an illegal kitchen, but she could also encourage them to make it into a 513, right? So it has like a real affordable housing component to it in our, the way that we could use it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like in Newport, what they did is they and like Amy lives there, right? So you would probably be familiar with this, that it's just not allowed in some neighborhoods
in
now.
particular
Right.
neighborhoods.
So it
yeah.
used to be a little bit like Block Island, like anybody could rent their house, right? But I think what some towns have found is that it's like extraordinarily disruptive in a in a neighborhood to have one or two houses that are renting by the week. So that's not our culture. Our culture is like every house around you is renting, and you might even rent your house, like, right? And like that's how people afford their mortgages. It's calculated into when they buy their house out here, they're calculating in that they can rent that house. And I'm like, I don't think I think we should, if we pursue this, we need to make it like very clear that we're not trying to limit that, right? Like I don't think we've ever had anybody come forward and say, oh, I don't want rentals in my neighborhood, right? So
Sure we have.
well, have we?
Yeah, we've had everything.
Exactly.
Well, then I'd have to say they're the ones who aren't on the same page as the rest of us. I mean,
I think the problem isn't with somebody renting their house, it's somebody renting their second, third, perhaps even fourth by this time house to multiple I had this conversation with somebody the other day, and it was, well, what's the difference between if you rent a house, it's a single family residence, you're renting it to a family. I said, yeah, you're renting it to 3 families. And you're going to seriously tell me that if you have a house, you're going to have 2 whole families of visitors all freaking summer long? And they kind of dropped on us. Oh, okay, they backed down.
so these are
That's what's happening.
these are some things that can be addressed within short-term rentals. So real estate, we have primarily real estate agents doing it out here, and they self-monitor a lot of this stuff themselves in terms of capacity of the house
They
and
try.
how many they do. They try really hard, right?
Mm.
But a lot of towns use short-term rental ordinances to control on-street parking, congestion, number of people in the houses, garbage. I don't know if we need to get that detailed.
I don't know. We have, we're starting to, this discussion is starting to move into, we did an agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
conversation around short-term rentals. So let's leave it at that. You and I will
Sure.
refine our, our approach. If anybody has any thoughts about questions, you especially like, for example, the solicitors or anybody to answer, don't hesitate to reach out. But Molly and I are fellow travelers in sharing articles back and forth about this and other issues. So
The only thing I said this last time, I think that I have to have a really definitive chart of what we have here now and what applies where, because I think people are still unclear on that.
I
And
agree.
which tax goes where and what goes upstate and what stays here. But and it's become more and more confusing over the past 10 years. I don't know how many years.
I agree. I think we have to have that as part of the conversation.
So I didn't bring up
Please.
one thing, and it's
Yeah.
more observational, and I'm not sure it's to Rick, and it goes to school money. But when I went to the new elected official meeting, they showed a couple grids about school spending, and it had Block Island like off the charts on local funding. I mean, the bar graph was, you couldn't even see the gray for state or federal funding. Is that something, I know lots of it's formula driven, like how many kids get ESL, blah, 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 blah. But is it something that can be looked at? Because it was so stark at how different Block Island was from the rest of Rhode Island towns.
I'm really glad you raised that because it was on my list of things and I forgot to do it with Rick today. But it's stark is a good word for it.
I mean, that was part of our very first conversation when we hired these guys, was about how we don't, with the square peg round hole thing. And it's not just to state of school funding, it's all of the funding in the town. We're at the bottom of every list. And what was the one where Little Compton got so much more money than we do?
It was ARPA.
And normally Block Island and Little Compton are right at the bottom of every list. And we had like 300,000, they had 1 million.
Yeah.
And it was what the heck happened? We even got shorted there.
I think that. Yeah, absolutely. Because I do think, so I think part of what we're trying to accomplish over the long haul with what we've been talking about today is the ability to have those conversations. And that's part of why I want to start meeting with these people early in the session. And it may not even happen this session, but just sort of over time, understanding that we may call them and say, or Rick may reach out to them, or Mary Ann may reach out to them and say, you have a school funding bill there, and we may need a tweak. And without a relationship and an understanding, that's very, that's virtually impossible to do. So yeah, I'm glad you raised it. Anything else to come before us today? Motion to adjourn would be in order. Second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, no. We are adjourned. Thank you, guys.